One of the things that's become very popular among people today is researching ancestry. It's always been something people wanted to know, their family tree and all that. But now with DNA, we're able to go back millennia and figure out our ancient roots. And lots of people are doing it. And some people getting back the results are not all that surprised because they pretty much knew, where their family came from and everything. Others are finding rather different things that they never knew that they had ancestors that came from that part of the world or anything. And some have found even more amazing things. I don't know if you were watching Jeopardy on Thursday night, but one of the contestants there mentioned that she did her ancestry thing and they discovered that she has a large amount of Neanderthal DNA in her background. I don't think she bargained for that, finding out that she actually was part Neanderthal. But why do we look for such things? Why is it important for us to know our ancestral background, our family tree and all that? The reason we do that is it gives us a sense of identity, of who we are. That my life didn't begin the day I was born or conceived, but that I am the continuation of a long and proud history behind me. And the more wonderful things we can find in that history, the better we feel about ourselves. I am part of something greater than myself. And we take great pride in that, whether it's our ancestry or our ethnic heritage. Sometimes we'll see people even here, especially in America, where we're all immigrants from other countries. It may be generations since our family left those countries behind, yet we still follow many of the customs, not because they were what were familiar to us, but because they give us that sense of identity, of who we are. This is where we came from. Without that, we're lost. And so the study of history is so very important because it reminds us of our background and gives us that identity that we want so much to have. With that in mind, we can understand a little bit of the first reading, what was happening with Ezra. In 586 BC, the Babylonians came in and destroyed Judah. They destroyed Jerusalem. The temple built by Solomon was reduced to rubble. And the tablets of the Ten Commandments were taken away and lost forever. If they're still around, we have no idea where they were. And everybody was taken captive to Babylon, where they sat for 70 years. And they had to reevaluate their relationship with God. But they didn't take everybody away to Babylon. They left behind the rabble, the poorest of the poor, illiterate people whom the Babylonians didn't consider important enough to carry away to Babylon. So the royalty, the nobility, the intelligentsia, those people were taken away, and they left behind just the poorest of the poor. And these people, for 70 years, had no one to tell them the story of what they were. Or they had a few people, maybe whatever stories the parents may have remembered they could tell their children, but they had no temple, no synagogues, they had no rabbis, they had no priests, they had nobody of learning to teach them anything. So for 70 years, they were like a people without an identity. And when finally Cyrus of Persia came along and defeated the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to go back home to Jerusalem, they went in little waves. And one of the first to go back was Ezra the priest. And when he went back, not only did he mourn over the destruction of Jerusalem, how the once proud city was now just overgrown with weeds, and there was nothing there, he also mourned to see the people who had no idea who they were. They had never heard the story of Abraham, the story of the Exodus, of how God took them out of Pharaoh's hand and parting of the Red Sea and giving them the Ten Commandments and the nation. They knew none of that. So he erected a platform and took the word of the Lord and read it to them all day. And the people's response was astounding. They listened carefully to everything that Ezra was reading to them. And as they heard their story open up before them, they wept. They wept over the fact of now knowing that they were part of a great promise and a part of a great tradition. And Ezra tells them, don't mourn, don't cry. Today is a day of rejoicing. Drink strong drink, which means have wine, and let's celebrate. This is a day of rejoicing because you found your meaning. You found your identity. And are we not a people today who we could say so many of our people are very much like those people for those 70 years in Israel who knew nothing about themselves? Ever since the 1960s, it seems somehow that so much of our Catholic identity has been lost, and a lot of it deliberately. Sadly, after the Second Vatican Council, and the writings of the council were brilliant, absolutely beautiful, wonderful teachings, many people who never took the time to read one of the documents of the council only understood that the Pope and the council allowed some new things, and somehow they pretty much decided 1,700 years of history and tradition, well, we're throwing them all out. That's old hat now. Now everything is new. And they gave us a new modern way of approaching with new music and new styles of prayer and everything else. And we ended up quickly going from the liturgy we had to music that was not Gregorian chant or any of the old things that some people, those of you who are old enough to remember the liturgy before the Second Vatican Council, all of a sudden now parishes had folk groups with people playing the Beatles and I Am a Rock and all the things I remember from my youth that I cringed to think that we were doing this in church. And instead of having priests in beautiful vestments, we had priests dressing up as clowns and doing all these other things. And it was as if we invented everything anew, and there was nothing of value to it. It lacked that sense of tradition, that sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves. And so much of our Catholic history was lost to us. My generation, it was horrible. The things we do not know about our ancient Catholic history and the things of which we should be part. And some of them that as the church tries to recover a lot of it today, as St. John Paul II had called for the reform of the reform and saying, let's keep what was good from after the council, but restore all the beautiful things that we lost because people in this newfangled idea just decided to throw out everything old and started bringing back new things. Little by little, people are appreciating it. I'm noticing how our young people are more and more appreciating adoration of the Blessed Sacrament and benediction, nocturnal adoration, Gregorian chant. I'll never forget the first time I heard Gregorian chant. I didn't hear it until I was in the seminary. I was like, wow, this is wonderful. And when I went to my first parish, the pastor, who was very much into the modernizing thing, was almost like annoyed that I liked Gregorian chants, and he thought I was, one of those reactionaries just trying to keep everything ancient alive and rejecting the new. And I had to say to him, I said, no. I said, you have to understand something. I was born during the Second Vatican Council. When I grew up, all I heard was guitar singing Kumbaya and Joy is Like the Rain. I never heard Gregorian chant. So when I went to the seminary and heard this, I said, this was something brand new. So for me, it was something modern, going back to the ancient things. And he says to me, he goes, have we come full cycle in one generation? But we have. And people are starting to realize more and more some of the beautiful traditions and the things that were lost. Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, as I mentioned, for another one. One of those beautiful gifts that we have that was given to us by four of our great saints, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Anthony, St. Dominic, and St. Thomas Aquinas, who all worked together to advocate this devotion to fight the heresy of Berengarianism, which came along at the time, which denied the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And so to remind people that Jesus is truly there, they came up with this beautiful custom. Thomas Aquinas wrote most of the hymns that we have, and it is rising again in popularity today, the richness of our Catholic tradition. And that helps us, the more we understand about our Catholic background, our history, the more we can appreciate things that on the surface don't look very meaningful to us, and we might even question. For example, a few years back when the new translation of the liturgy came in, which a lot of priests were skeptical about in the beginning because the wording didn't, really tripped over your tongue. And I don't mean in a beautiful way. We were used to the colloquialisms of the expressions, and now we had this more formal language. I've come to love it, because I find it gives a greater dignity and solemnity to the Mass, that we're not praying to God with colloquialisms and cliches, but with a more formal language that is more appropriate to worship of God. And one of the changes that a lot of people ask about is in the Creed. When we used to say, one in being with the Father, and now we're saying consubstantial with the Father. And some people are asking, why did they have to get rid of one in being, which we understand, and use this archaic word consubstantial that nobody uses anymore? And the reason for that is to remind ourselves of our rich history. That was the battle cry of the Council of Nicaea, fighting the heresy of semi-Arianism in the 4th century, where there were some people who were believing, Jesus is God, but he's not really of the same substance as the Father. He was some sort of a demigod, little less than the Father. And so the bishops defending the faith cried out, consubstantial. Consubstantial, in Latin, of course, consubstantialis. The Greeks, homoousion, homoousion. And it became the battle cry. Just like, remember the Alamo, bishops were crying out, consubstantial, consubstantial, consubstantial. And it won the day. And so this should be one of those things that we turn to with pride, to remember a rich part of our tradition, how the church had to battle this terrible heresy of thinking that Jesus was less than the Father and say, no, he is consubstantial, of the same substance as the Father. I'm happy to see a lot of people today more and more wanting to hear our Catholic history. Not only the physical history of what happened in Christendom, but the rituals and the things that we do. Why we have so many things in our Mass that we might wonder, why does the priest do this? Why does he say that? And some of it is so ancient. Some of it even goes back to ancient Jewish worship that we have taken from the worship in the temple. And so we have a beautiful, rich tradition. And it's like our Catholic DNA is this whole tradition. So consubstantial is in our DNA. Adoration is in our DNA. So many other things are part of what make us Catholics. And as St. Luke tells us that in the beginning of the gospel reading today, that he went to carefully trace out everything from the beginning, I think it would be helpful for all of us to carefully trace out our Catholic history and to see where we have come from, why we have the beautiful things we do, rather than just dismissing vestments and all sorts of other things that sometimes people say, why do you need this? Why do we need that? Look at it and understand its origin, and we find a richness. And that we say the promise that Jesus made that has been carried out through the past 2,000 years is fulfilled in our midst each and every Sunday. And my brothers and sisters, we are here today as part of a rich inheritance. You and I have inherited the great faith that began with the apostles and has been handed down to us today. It's as if we're running a relay race and now the baton is given to us. It is our opportunity and our privilege to run with that faith, to be proud of our background, to know our history, to know our ancestry, to know our Catholic DNA, and to be proud of it and preach it to the ends of the earth, knowing that what Jesus said 2,000 years ago is indeed fulfilled in our hearing each and every day. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.